Welcome to Between the Before and After, a podcast about the stories that shape us. I'm your host, Coach John McLernan, and each episode I bring you an inspiring guest with a moving story that shines a light on the power of the human spirit. Before we dive in, I want to let you know about two very important things. Number one, the stories shared here are often gritty, raw, and vulnerable, and very likely will include speaking about sensitive topics suited for a mature audience. Number two, this podcast is also broadcast live on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So on whatever platform you follow myself or Freedom Nutrition Coaching, you have the opportunity to participate in this discussion during the live stream. And we encourage your participation both by commenting and asking questions. And so this podcast is about exploring the stories that take place between the before and after photos, not just in the realm of weight loss, but in all areas of life. So let's dive in. All right, welcome back. I am chatting today with Karyn, and we were having a little bit of a joke about the name Karyn because over the last couple of years, it seems like it's taken on a life of its own. What has your experience been being named Karyn in the last couple of years?
It sure has taken a life of its own, John. When we were talking, I shared I had to do some inner work around it. I was really insecure about Karyn becoming a bad name to have, and the rep that came along with being a Karyn. I can specifically remember, especially during 2020, where it seemed to be rather rampant, that I would go to Starbucks and, they ask for your name, and I either wanted to give my middle name, which is Alexis, or I wanted to say, I'm not that kind of Karyn, and you spell my name with a Y. And then I realized, well, that's kind of Karyn of me to do that.
Yeah.
So now I try to just to be a good sport about it and know that it too shall pass.
Yeah. I think that's probably the best way to approach it is I'm trying to think, what was the male version? I wondered if it was Dave, but I think
the male version was Chad.
Chad. Oh yeah.
I think it was Chad.
Because I know what it was. In Canada, we had a series of commercials about "Don't be a Dave."
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and it was just meant to be humorous, and I think it was connected to job interviews or something. It's like, "Don't be a Dave" in this job interview. But yeah, okay. So a Chad is like the male version of a Karyn.
I think so. Something like that.
It's so funny because I think when I hear Karyn, I think caring. That's like the first thought that comes to mind for me. So.
Yep, I understand. I've learned I just have to be a good sport about it, and it'll pass. And just I finally appreciated my parents spelling my name different with a Y. So good things have come from it too.
Yeah, that's awesome. So before we dive into your story, where are you at now, and kind of what are you doing? Because we're going to dive into your story and figure out how you got here.
Of course. So I call myself the happiness mentor.
Yeah.
And I work with people, primarily women in their 30s and 40s, who are at a place very much like I was in my early 30s of feeling lost from themselves and having what I call a great life on paper, all the boxes checked, but still feeling unfulfilled and empty. And so I teach people how to connect with themselves to find that fulfillment within who they are, because that's been my journey, and really teaching people a roadmap to happiness.
And actual happiness versus, and I love what you said there. What a great expression, like having a great life on paper.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of people out there that are living like this, and we could almost say the digital version is like having a great life on social media.
Very much.
Like portraying this, but it's like, I don't even live the life that people see on social media. I try to be as authentic as possible, because I'm like, when people meet me, I don't want them to be disappointed and be like, oh, I thought you were this, I'm demigod, I see like celebrities get elevated to like this status of like demigod, which, and I'm like, if I met a celebrity, like, which I have met a few in my day, I've never been starstruck. I've just been like, hey, it's really interesting to meet you. And I'm kind of curious about your human experience, finding yourself in this position of being a celebrity. I've never been like, oh my gosh, my life is forever changed because I shook hands with or touched the shoulder of so-and-so. Like,
That's
but
pretty neat.
Yeah. So, and you also touched on something really, really important. Of course, we're going to dive into this, but it's the work that you do. And I find this a lot, especially in the coaching space. The work that people do is very often a direct result of your own life experience and the things you've had to overcome to get to this place. And it's that unique experience where you went looking for help and weren't able to find the help that you were looking for, that led you to, well, if I can't find this help, I wonder how many other people out there are struggling with this. And I need to kind of create that roadmap.
It's been a huge blessing. Before I was able to teach from my own experience, I was very much what I consider a false teacher, where I
Yeah.
couldn't do the things that I was teaching my clients, and I was just regurgitating the things I had read in books that I knew I was supposed to think that way, but I couldn't do it in my life, so I felt very much like a fraud.
Yeah. I mean, I think in the coaching space, imposter syndrome is genuinely a thing, anyways,
Mhm,
because what we do, in one sense, and this thing is necessary, is we position ourselves as having overcome something significant in life. And as such, because of that experience, as well as maybe some qualifications, that we're positioned to help another person or guide another person through that. And there, I mean, I love being a coach. There's something about coaching. I always have coaches with me as well, because there's just something about having someone else sort of looking, a third party, somewhat emotionally detached person looking into what I'm doing and saying, let me show you what you can't see yourself. There's tremendous value in that.
yeah,
But I remember a number of times feeling like a total fraud, because I'm like, I don't look like a fitness model and I help people lose weight,
mm,
because I thought that's what I needed to be.
I can
And it was,
understand that.
yeah, it was like
Uh,
this huge hurdle for me. So
yeah,
um, in your case, it was, would it be life coaching? I know you said a happiness mentor. Maybe you hide,
mhm.
or avoid using the term like life coaching because it's been hijacked. And
It is something that I really consider myself a teacher.
yeah.
Whereas I see with coaching is a wonderful tool where a coach really tries to help somebody towards their goals in
Hmm, hmm.
life and to really get clear on what their goals and their vision are, which is not what I do. I really teach people concepts that they can take and apply in their lives. And what I've learned as a teacher and working with people is I can't make them do anything. I can show up 1,010% as a teacher, um, be in their court, but and just like I've had to learn for me in my own journey, that it's solely up to them whether they take what I'm teaching them and apply it in their lives or not. And I can't be responsible for
Yeah.
what they're going to do or not do with that information.
Yeah, and that it's very interesting. Some, like, I think this is every coach's experience as
Mhm.
well. Is we come to a certain point where we recognize. I mean, I say to my clients, "I'm your tour guide, not your Sherpa."
I like that.
And I did what I'm just trying to express to them. And I think everyone picks up on it really quickly. As long as they know what a Sherpa is, they kind of get it.
Mhm.
It's, I can't carry your backpack. I can help you unpack it, take things out of it, maybe add some different tools in, but ultimately you're going to carry your backpack with the tools in it. I'm just going to equip you differently and hopefully better for the journey that you're going to go on. And it would actually be very disempowering to someone if I was to, like, I said, if you hand me your problems and I solve them and hand them back to you, you've learned nothing and gained nothing from that experience.
Yeah. That was very much my experience in my own journey
Yeah.
of going to see healers and wanting someone to fix me, wanting someone to do the heavy lifting for me. And that's really where I lost myself and gave all my power away. So I really agree with that approach.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're already kind of warmed up, but I wanted to just pull a question out of my deck of cards here and just ask one
Mm,
more warm up question before we dive into the deeper stuff. And the one that I pulled up here was, describe a moment you were proud of yourself.
mm, I really like that. One of the One of the areas that I've worked the hardest on myself, John, and in my journey is in my marriage with my husband. And as I teach and all the other work I do, the only way to change is to see ourselves as the problem. And
Mm,
very shortly after my husband and I got married, we've been married 8 years, things started to fall apart really quickly. And we've both felt a lot of distance, a lot of disconnection, and I blamed my husband, and I put it on him that he was emotionally unavailable, that he was the one that got distant, that he didn't know how to communicate, he didn't know how to do marriage, and in that, I completely pushed him away and made him wrong, and he pulled away. And so something I'm very proud of in myself is the work I've done to look at myself and my marriage and see myself as the problem, and
mhm,
how
mhm.
quickly that worked to turn my marriage around. And my husband
Yeah.
and I have a lovely relationship now, and not to say it's not without challenges, because I often
Mm-mm.
say marriage is hard at best, and it takes hard work. It really does. We
Yeah.
don't know that, and we don't realize that before we get married. And my marriage is something, and the work I've done, um, how my husband and I are able to come together is something I'm very, very proud of in myself and in my life.
That's beautiful and amazing. And kudos to your husband as well. And as you were describing, I had a smile on my face because I was like, man, my wife used to call me the Tin Man.
Mm,
And and it was appropriate because I was. It wasn't that I wasn't that I was cold or unfeeling, but I was definitely emotionally distant, and I think it actually came from a fear within myself of
mm,
actually being vulnerable, especially being male, being vulnerable and letting her see like my vulnerable side, my weaknesses, and things like that. When I had this idea in my head, I love being male, I love being masculine. It's wonderful, and I'm very much an advocate for positive masculinity. There's so many wonderful things about it, and I really think we should, I don't want to get sidetracked, but we should steer men towards. Here's something to go towards versus here's something to run away from. We really
agree.
need that. But it took quite a while for me to get to the place exactly that where I was like, oh shoot, I'm the one that needs to do this work.
Mm,
You know, and there's I remember writing a post about it's your fault and that's a good thing. I think
mm.
that was the title of it, something along those lines. And I was like, oh boy, I wonder how this is going to get received. you
Yeah, I
know?
can understand that. People often ask me, "Gosh, was that a tough pill to swallow when you learned you were the problem?" And I say in hindsight, actually, no, because it was the very thing that freed me. But starting to see that and adopt that perspective in my life, I thought it was a tough pill to swallow, but then I realized everything I was doing to myself, blaming others and living in a victim mentality, that made life very hard. That was a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, there's an attraction to being a victim.
Hmm.
And there is because it's, in one sense, it's a somewhat easy way to get sympathy, and sympathy feels really good, and to tap into caring people and so on. But this idea, I said, I want to reframe, because I think when I wrote this post, I should dig it up and repost it sometime. When I wrote this thing, I said, I want to reframe this idea that it's your fault.
Mm,
What we're actually saying is the power to change lies in my hands. And that's a good thing, because I don't have to, when we say I'm powerless, it's impossible to change. There is no hope. Why would you try? But when we say the power to change is in my hands, so when it's my fault becomes I hold the power to change, it goes from feeling like a heavy weight on your back to an exciting possibility.
yeah, yeah, very much. And I have learned that there's a big difference between putting faults on myself and taking responsibility to see
Mm,
how I'm the problem, to see how my choices and decisions have created the very life that I have. And it is very empowering to know that then if it's me, then I'm empowered to be the solution. As long as it's somebody else or my past, I can't do anything about it, which is the
mm.
powerlessness and being very disempowered in life.
Yeah, yeah. So that's wonderful. So now you weren't always the happiness mentor.
I was not always the happiness mentor.
In fact, I would say maybe it's fair to say, just from the little bit I know, and we'll explore it a little bit now. But I think maybe there was quite a significant period of your life where you were not happy.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, I would
Yeah.
say the majority of my life. I'm almost 39, and
Hmm.
I would say up until 8, well, I guess it's about 8 years now. I was very unhappy, and very very much pretending that everything was okay, but very unhappy. So the majority of my life.
Yeah. Well, good on you for. It took me till I was nearly 40 to figure this out.
Yeah, I would feel very blessed and feel that I had a divine intervention at 31, that God put people on my path that I needed to get
Yeah.
to where I am today and start on my path. Yeah.
Yeah. So if we look back, maybe even as far as childhood or teen years,
Hmm.
what sort of stands out for you, if anything, that might have led to you being sort of unhappy and going into that rebellious teenager phase and whatnot?
Hmm. I very much look at my own humanness and that I was very much predispositioned just in who I am and my humanness to want to do what I want when I want. And that was very strong in me from a young age and very much in a rebellious way. So I can remember My dad's a retired Master Chief from the Navy, from the U.S. Navy, and he was on submarines growing up. And my mom was going to school full time at the University of Florida to become a nurse. And my older brother and sister were who looked after me. And those are my first memories of. I was about 4 or 5. My brother and sister are a bit older than me. My sister's 7 years older. My brother is 13 years older.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Wow.
and
Bit of a gap.
yeah, and I was a happy surprise. I often joke, and you know, I can remember as early as 3 or 4 years old already pushing the rules, bending the rules, trying to avoid consequences. I was very sneaky. As a young child, I lied a lot, and I was the kind of child where I was caught in the lie, but I would not admit it, like,
Yeah.
until my dad.
Stubbornness would kick in.
Oh my goodness, stubbornness to the extreme. And that very much carried over into my teenage years and even before that, like middle school years, like 11, 12 years old, where I really got into trouble to get attention. And it was a way for me
Okay.
to get negative attention because I didn't feel good about myself on the inside. I often, people ask, well, was it your parents? And I used to think that going to traditional therapy, but now I know I was going to be who I was going to be, and I was going to be stubborn, and I was going to get in trouble, and I was going to do what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it. And I really sought that out. And now I understand it's because I didn't feel good about myself. I knew what was right and wrong. I
Mm-hmm.
grew up with strong morals and parents who instilled strong morals in me. I knew the difference between right and wrong, and I actively chose to do the things that were wrong against myself because I didn't feel good about myself. I quite bluntly hated myself. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It's such an interesting idea because I went through a period of really self-loathing, but it really was happening a lot more in my 30s, actually.
Mhm,
But this idea that we could like really hate or dislike or even loathe ourselves and where that comes from.
mhm,
And do you have, although it's obviously we're looking back in hindsight, do you have any idea where this
mhm.
idea that you should like maybe hate yourself comes from?
Sure. So, in my experience and what I've learned through my own journey, John, and what I teach to others is that, and this can sound like almost unbelievable, but to me, it's innate in our humanness. And
Okay.
here's why. As humans, we inherently are wired to look for our meaning and purpose externally.
Hmm.
Our pursuit of human happiness, like we talked about earlier, checking the boxes, getting the great life on paper. Our human pursuit of happiness is really our unhappiness because we
Hmm.
constantly feel something missing inside of us. We feel a deep lack or want because we are wired to look to fill that void, to fill that emptiness outside of us and the people, things, relationships, and life. So I say it's often like we're a bucket with holes in it. And everything we grab towards out here, whether, a job, getting a degree, getting married, having children, making the money you want to make, buying a home, um, having friends. I'm also thinking about when I was younger, what I wanted then. Good grades. We look for those things to fill us and give us a sense of meaning and purpose, but they never do because they're
Hmm.
outside of us. They're always changing. They're short-lived. So we constantly have this emptiness and void as humans that's our own lack of meaning and purpose and who we are. And the choices and decisions we make trying to get that meaning and purpose fulfilled from our external world, we don't feel good about who we are in those choices and decisions we make
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
we abandon ourselves. We don't learn how to be true to who we are. And it ultimately makes us feel bad about ourselves, and we don't develop internal self value because we're
Hmm.
looking for all of our value outside of us. So we never develop that sense of self value. And in my experience, that's why we hate ourselves. That's why we don't feel good about ourselves.
Yeah, what's really interesting, I believe it was maybe Stephen Covey, the author of Seven Habits of Highly Successful People. I don't know if I'm quoting the book title right. I think it's Stephen Covey. It was something I read many years ago now. Probably should look it up again. But what seems to stick out to me was this concept of living a values-centered life as opposed to could we say like an opinion centered life? I'm not sure what he called it, but I guess essentially the opinions of people and society and popular opinions shift all the time. And so if we try to use that as our measuring stick of whether or not I am a good person, that it's a moving target that we can never hit. And we'll never be happy. Whereas when we have a sense of like values, core values, we could even call them in business, we will refer to them as core values. That this is my measuring stick. How do I measure up to these values? And so for me, for example, compassion and integrity are my top two values. Compassion being number one. For many years of my life, it wouldn't have been. I ran away from compassion. I thought it was for weak people, and I had a really distorted view of even what it was. But I wonder if even forming these sort of intrinsic values, that if we don't have this lens of compassion, it may not necessarily move us into the place of being able to appreciate ourselves. But once we add in this lens of compassion, that we're able to look at ourselves honestly and clearly, but with compassion as opposed to judgment, if that can help us to be a little bit freer to, because I say compassion is about creating awareness around our behaviors without judgment so that we can create change. I think in a long-winded way, that's kind of what I'm trying to say.
Sure. I one of the things that I learned that was very counterintuitive to me was that I couldn't outgrow and I couldn't let go of my limiting behaviors that made me feel bad about myself until I was willing to shine the light on those behaviors and actually take responsibility that that's me, that this is who I am, which can sound really scary. Like I'll be candid and vulnerable. One of the very first things in this path that I took that started taking about 8 years ago, I had to own that I was manipulative. And my marriage was a big place I had to see how manipulative I was. And it sounded really scary to know myself as, hi, my name is Karyn, I'm manipulative. Not who I wanted to present myself to be or who I wanted people to see myself as, but it was in the power of knowing that as me without judgment. Vulnerable. Definitely what I call an OS moment of, oh, that's me. But then that willingness to go there and be vulnerable with ourselves actually leads to a place of self-acceptance and a place of compassion, of knowing, okay, I know this is who I am and that's okay. And now from that place of being neutral and accepting myself in that place, then I can change because I'm no longer denying the behavior about myself. And so I can catch myself when I'm, oh, that's me as manipulative. So I can make different choices. And that's actually how we change. And that was very counterintuitive to me and the path that I had taken of healing.
So because and this idea of being manipulative, I look at that again. I have this lens. I have lenses that I sort of view things, because none of us ever see reality as it actually is. It's filtered through various lenses that we have up in front of us, right? Like information comes in through our senses, whether it's our sound, our hearing, our smell, our sight, that kind of thing, and then we interpret it based on our lived experience, if I can put it that way. So I have these different lenses, and one of them is that all behavior makes sense. So I think, well, if someone's manipulative, that to me speaks of someone who's afraid and always trying to be in control. And so manipulation is a form of control, but rooted in fear. And I wonder if that was your experience, that if there was, when you look back in hindsight, was there, reason that you felt a need to be in control? Like as though, if somebody finds out who I am, they're going to leave me.
That's a good question. I tend to look through the lens that it's just part of my humanness, that as humans, and especially living from the mind, we have these different behaviors that are unsavory and not how we want to live. And there's something for me, John, and just seeing it as my humanness, that I have a side of me that can be manipulative and controlling, and that when I see that, then I have a choice whether I want to live from that place or not, and I can accept
Mm.
myself in that humanness. And very much in living from the mind, I think everything that we do from the mind and that distorted reality we live in, it all comes from a place of fear. It all comes
Mm.
from and to me, and understanding myself and my humanness, it comes from a place of fearing being exposed.
Yeah, that someone's going to see me as I am.
Hmm.
Because there's a very primal desire as human beings that we want to be accepted and a part of a tribe. Because this whole idea that like no man is an island, or is which is the opposite of like a self-made individual, for example. And I think the idea of a self-made individual is entirely a myth, right? Because all of us really, I mean, the fact that we're communicating through microphones and the internet, and it's inventions of people who've come before us that have opened the way for us to even have this conversation today. And so I think the idea of a self-made person is a total myth, that actually does more harm than good. But so then you look back and you think, well, boy, I was a real manipulator. Like, what was this, something, a whole pattern that you saw kind of going on through your 20s? Like, what were you
Hmm.
doing during your 20s?
Sure. Yeah, great question. So my rebellion that we talked a little bit about started um, really from as young as like 3 or 4, and then I really started getting into trouble in seventh and eighth grade. Uh,
Hmm.
Eighth grade was the first time I got arrested
Okay.
for actually huffing Freon from an air conditioner behind a movie theater, and that
Wow.
began a very. I remember how terrified my family was. I was not um, with I was not mature enough or understanding enough of what I was actually doing. And my brother had actually had a friend die from huffing in high school, and my family was incredibly concerned. It was terrifying to them, a red flag of who is Karyn hanging out with, and this isn't the Karyn we know. I was very much
Mm.
more of a closet rebel. I wasn't
Right,
the
right, right.
middle finger in authorities' faces causing a big ruckus. I was the sneaky rebel where I wanted to look like I was okay, but behind closed doors, I was not okay.
Yeah.
Um, and that led to more drug use and hard drugs in high school that led into smoking a lot of pot,
Mm.
um, and then doing ecstasy all through high school. Then that transitioned into my 20s of getting into cocaine, and
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
lasted until I was about 26. And I constantly put myself in situations to be taken advantage of, to be assaulted, to um, really put myself in situations that by all means I don't believe I should be alive today. And
Hmm.
I don't say that jokingly or
Right. Yeah.
that really, truly, I was on a very destructive path. And that lasted until I was about 26 or 27.
So what really fascinates me is like, so if you were being arrested at 13 for huffing freon, like, were you being arrested for destruction of property? You know,
No, we were actually caught. The friends was with, I was actually caught. The cops saw us huffing, and that's what we were actually arrested for. Was yeah.
it seems so funny to me, I guess, again, given sort of my background in behavioral psychology and
Mm,
whatnot. Like, when you arrest someone for using drugs, I'm like, or like huffing freon, I'm like, that I'm like, that's a cry for help.
hmm. Yeah, very much.
So it almost speaks to kind of looking at our criminal justice system and going, I wonder if there's some ways that we should maybe look at this differently. Like, I'm going to arrest you and put you in jail to try to scare you into not doing this again.
Mm,
Well, I don't think that really creates behavior change. It's like, well, hang on a
mm,
sec. What led you to making that decision?
mm,
And so you went from there
mhm,
to using more hard drugs.
mhm.
Where were you? I guess it's probably not that hard to get, but I mean, like,
Yeah.
where were you getting ecstasy as a teenager?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I haven't thought about that before. Um, I think I always hung out with older people.
Hmm.
Um, and then I had people, friends my age as well, but I really tried to be around older people. I worked in restaurants
Yeah,
as early as 16. And restaurants are kind of a haven for anything you want to get your hands on when you work in the restaurant industry.
interesting.
So that I know that must have come into play, and just knowing, um, I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. and those things were more readily available. So I think it was probably who do we know that can get their hands on these things, and it was very much. So I graduated high school in 2002, and I know rave parties and things like that were very popular at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where you would go to get those kinds of things. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you recall about your first experience like using MDMA?
Mm. Under the illusion of being on a drug, I thought that that's what happiness was supposed to be. I felt, it takes away any inhibition, and it is a very euphoric um, feeling, although short-lived for a few hours, but a very blissed out, nothing is wrong. I think people I feel out of the loop now, that I don't know the lingo anymore for a long time, but I think it was called like the love drug or something like that because it made you feel um, these incredible feelings of love for everyone and everything,
Mm-hmm.
but it wasn't real. And
Yeah.
that was very misguiding. That experience was very misguiding in my humanness to think that that's what happiness was supposed to be. That
Right.
that that feeling, that blissed out state, feeling on top of the world, feeling that you love everyone and everything was the ultimate pinnacle to get to be happy. And once I got off my path with drugs, I started chasing that feeling, that euphoric experience through a spiritual path. And
Yeah.
that's what
Interesting.
I thought I needed to achieve, and that's what happiness was gonna be, and now I know that's not anywhere close to what happiness actually is.
Yeah. Yeah. That which is super fascinating to me. Just that experience. Do you recall like what you felt like when the effects of it wore off? Did it feel
Mm,
something akin to depression?
I do, severe depression, um, feeling completely emptied and, um, checked out and very, like, how can I get back to that feeling? I need to get
Right.
back to that feeling because the coming off of that is a shock, very much a
Yeah.
shock to the system because it drains all of um, all of the good feelings, all
Neurotransmitters.
the
Yeah. The
neurotransmitters. It drains everything. So then it's the darkest kind of emptiest feeling that I've probably ever felt.
Right. It's almost akin to like burning through a week's worth of dopamine
Hmm.
in a night,
Yeah, yeah,
and
it's
then you go through
not a
like the
good
rest.
experience.
Then you don't have any dopamine available because you've kind of burned through it,
Yeah.
and so now your body has to go through this kind of reset. Like I've heard it used before. I know it's not clinically accurate, but depressed as deep rest. And I was like,
Mm,
that's really interesting way to think about it. And because I come at it from a slightly different experience, having gone through some severe anxiety in my 30s as a result of PTSD and trauma, where when I would come off of an anxiety episode, I would fall into kind of like this blackness essentially. I don't know how to describe it, but like this heavy cloud would descend over my head, and I really
mhm,
struggled to feel things. And I would close my eyes, and it would just feel like I was staring into this blackness. And but it was really because like anxiety was running my nervous system so high, and so if I could use like an engine running it so hot that it had to go into this depressed state to almost recover from having used all of that up for that period
mm,
of time. And so it feels very, very draining. And so
yeah,
I wondered if you know,
very draining. Very, very draining.
yeah, and then so it starts this cycle of chasing the high, hitting the low. Okay, I got to get back to that
Mm,
rave and chase the high and have this sensory overload, and then crashing down. And at some point in time, you decided to make the switch, not make the switch, but to add cocaine to the mix because
yeah,
maybe ecstasy wasn't quite cutting it.
yeah. I do know that somewhere along that time period, because ecstasy was quite the kind of, it sounds so, like the hip drug to be
Hmm, hmm.
doing, and so there were lots of, specials on it, trying to warn parents, trying to warn,
Mm,
kids, and I remember very specifically seeing how it puts holes in your brain. And that scared the crap out of me, quite honestly. And I knew
okay,
that I couldn't do ecstasy as a long-term drug.
practice. Yeah, yeah.
uh, and not to, I don't know what my logical thinking was that cocaine would be better than that. But I very much know now in hindsight that I I wanted to be on a train of self-destruction, that's how badly I felt about myself. And I remember moving from Memphis to Denver, and I worked at a restaurant, and I knew people were into cocaine, and I had not done cocaine. I was 22, and I actively sought it out. And I know now in hindsight, that's how badly I felt about myself. And I wanted to find something to be destroying myself and to put myself in harm's way.
Yeah, fascinating again. And the first bump of cocaine, like, what do you remember thinking? Because there's probably a few seconds, maybe a few minutes before it actually hits you.
Mm-hmm.
What do you remember thinking in sort of the space of those moments?
I don't think I was really thinking anything. I just wanted something to take me away from reality of how bad I felt about myself, how directionless I felt, um, and anything to escape my life, anything to escape me.
Mm.
And I knew that could do it, and that led to four years of heavily using cocaine, till I got to a point where I was on a very slippery slope where I knew if you keep going this direction, it's going to lead to something worse than cocaine, and you're not going to get off this train, and you are going to become an addict, and that is going to be your life. That's going to be your life, and you're going to you're going to kill yourself, like whether it's through drugs or you get to that depressed of a state, you're not going to be here anymore. And there was something in me that there was a stronger desire to live and figure myself out than to keep headed down that path.
Yeah.
And I look at that as something bigger than me trying to shake me awake, and I call that God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And some part of me that could listen and saw that. And that's when I started to take steps off that path. I knew I was on a very slippery slope, and I was close, very, very close to the edge of falling over and never coming back.
Yeah. How did you how did you stop using? Because I mean, obviously, there's a very strong, at least psychological addiction to something like cocaine. I don't know if there's as much physiological dependence, but
Sure.
how did you stop using?
I made a choice
Yeah.
that I couldn't do that. I feel very, very fortunate that I had not created a biological dependency. Had I created a biological dependency at that point, I would not have been able to just stop. But I was disgusted with myself. I was sick of hiding and
Yeah.
sick of dancing around, making people think, especially my family and loved ones, that I was okay when I wasn't. And I was very sick of that life. And I still worked in the restaurant industry, and there were a couple times after making that initial decision, this isn't who I want to be, this isn't how I want to live my life, where I dipped a toe back in, but it was never back to what it was between 22 and 26. Yeah.
Was any of your family aware to some degree that you were living this other life, that this was taking place? Because I wonder, like, we maybe think we're hiding it, but we're not doing a very good job.
I think that they were pretty aware that I was not okay. But I was so stubborn and so convincing. This was where the manipulation and control would come in. I was so convincing that I was fine and very resistant to any kind of help, that my family, I believe, did everything that they could try to get me on a good path. And I pushed them away so much that at a point they knew there wasn't anything else they were going to do, that they had to back away and honestly, that's the best thing that they could have done, because the more that they tried to help me, as good intentioned as it was, the more I actually used that to enable myself, and go deeper down the path, because I always had people there to bail me out. So I don't think they knew the extent. If they were listening right now, they might be like, "Oh my God, Karyn, it's been 4 years. Sorry, guys." I had to make a decision. Telling my story and sharing my message was more important
Yeah.
and then trying to hide those things and not being
Yeah.
vulnerable. But so they might be
Yeah.
a shock to find out it was that bad. Um, but I really was very stubborn and not wanting to let anyone help me. But I know that they knew things were not okay. They just didn't. They ran out of ideas of how to even help me or what to do because I
Yeah.
wasn't forthcoming. And this is what's going on. I'm
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
cocaine and I'm on these drugs. I was not forthcoming about that with
Yeah.
my family.
Yeah, and that's tough, you know. Um, but you said so you went on a kind of a spiritual journey.
I did.
So
Yeah.
so
That became my new drug
right.
after I
So
got off drugs.
right now that you've used physical drugs to sort of create this euphoric state, now you're like, well, if I can't use drugs, I wonder if I can find this through spiritualism.
Yeah. Yep. I was still incredibly lost from myself. And as I started to get off drugs, I started going to therapy, and that was helpful to at least try to start to cope with some of my issues. But it certainly didn't resolve anything.
Mm,
It didn't get me to a place of resolution. So then I wanted something more. I was seeking a deeper meaning and purpose. And I had a friend who saw a shamanic healer regularly.
okay.
And I said, well, that sounds interesting. Tell me more about that. And um, I decided that was a path that I was going to explore. And I started studying shamanism and connecting with the spirit world and what are in shamanism is known as your benevolent helping spirits. And I was mystified by the path, and it was very different than anything I'd ever knew about or learned about. I grew up Catholic, so it was very out there and different. And then that led into studying Reiki. It led into practicing yoga, meditation. I went to astrologers, I went to psychics, and on top of that, I also trained in all these things and became a spiritual healer. And that was very much my new drug, my new way to escape myself, which sounds counterintuitive. You'd think,
Mm,
no, but no, your spiritual path is how you find yourself. And mine was not. It took me
right.
much further away from myself. And I just went down a new path of self-destruction that was a lot more socially acceptable.
That's a good way of putting it. A path of self-destruction that was socially acceptable, and in this, I can say, like, even as a coach, and it's easier to help other people than to help ourselves.
Very much. I was very much that person where unknowingly I had gone on the path of helping other people because that was easier than having to really look at myself and help myself. And while I was trying to do that with the things I was doing, it wasn't leading me to a place of healing. It was leading me to more confusion and more disconnection from myself. I just couldn't see it while I was in it.
Yeah, I'm curious. What A couple of questions, like, what was confusing about it when you look back and
Mhm,
reflect? And did you, because you reference God and you reference a Catholic
mhm,
upbringing. I'm not sure if you have a Christian faith now,
mhm,
but I guess I'm curious then. Did you find some kind of spiritual power in this, in a
mhm.
sense, but maybe it was an unsettling or disconcerting power?
Um, in my experience, everything I've found was a false sense of power. Um, because everything I did on my spiritual path was looking for my answers, looking for myself anywhere but me.
Mm, mm,
I was looking to the healers, to the books, to the psychics, to anything and everything I was doing to give me the answers about me and what I needed to be doing in my life, which led me further and further away from myself where I wasn't connected to me or knew how to find my answers in me. So there were any kind of power I maybe had in that, it was all a false sense of power. It wasn't real or true to me.
mm. Did you have any could I guess we call it spiritual experiences
Hmm.
that felt unsettling to you when
Mm.
you're trying to pursue these sort of practices?
No, in fact, that's what I was chasing. I wanted some kind of, I read books about people who had awakenings and these supreme, spiritual experiences, and I wanted that. that became the new drug. That became the high that I was chasing. So I didn't find any of that unsettling. If anything, I wanted that. I was on a desperate search of like, let me have this divine
Lightning.
awakening, and that happened, but not in any way that I actually thought and can think of now. The unsettling experience that happened um, very close to when I found my mentors now, who helped me get on a path to myself.
Yeah, yeah. And so where in this journey did you meet your husband?
Sure. So I actually met my husband at the very end of the self-destruction drug use in my 20s. We met when I was 26, and I was coming out of a relationship with the person who I was heavily into drugs with. So we met through that, and as I began to go to therapy and as I began to explore spiritually, I brought my husband right along with me, and he's a good sport, and I started he's a real good sport. I lucked out and found an incredible man.
Yeah.
But he went right along with me. And he, because there was a part of him that was curious spiritually. So we actually studied shamanism together and started training to become shamanic practitioners together. And we started a healing practice in 2013 called the Soul's Thread. And we were actually in business together until that all came crumbling down.
Yeah, yeah. And was he aware of your destructive past?
He was, yeah,
Yeah,
very much. We share commonality um, in that, in our trying to find ourselves in our 20s and him in his
okay.
30s. So he was aware of that,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
yeah, that wasn't a secret.
Okay, that's good. I think that's really, really important. I recall my wife and I, when we first started dating, we recognized there was a real kinship and connection and chemistry here. And so one night we sat down and had the skeletons in our closet conversation.
Oh,
And
sure.
so we said, we're going to sit down and have this conversation. We're going to pull all the skeletons out of our closet. And if we still want to be together after this, then I think we're going to be okay.
Hmm. Yeah, yep. Yeah, the good test of the relationship.
Yeah, yeah. And it wasn't that we necessarily heard things that we were comfortable with about the other person, what they had done or experienced, but it
Yeah,
wasn't, it was like, well, I can work through that because it's more important to me that I'm with you than
yeah.
letting that experience in your past or my past be the thing that
Mhm.
separates us from, you know. And so you said it all came crumbling down.
Yeah, it did.
In terms of, and was it like a sudden sort of or an awakening moment? Like what made it all come crumbling down?
It was an awakening moment. Um, we talked a little bit, did you have any unsettling experiences? And the awakening moment was unsettling. I had actually gotten very sick. This was March of 2015. It was the same month that I was scheduled to have a workshop with my now mentors. And at the beginning of the month, I got incredibly ill for about 2 weeks. And I'm can be a stubborn person in general. And I was also very stubborn about getting medical attention until my husband said, we need to get you to a doctor. Like, this is not good. And I said, okay, fine. And he took me to an urgent care, and because I thought it was maybe just a flu, but I had this horrible neck pain and this horrible migraine, and I had had it for a week. So my husband took me to the urgent care,
Mm.
and they said, you need to get to the ER immediately, because they thought that I had meningitis.
Ooh,
So my husband packs me back up. We go to the ER, um, and they say, we're going to need to do a spinal tap.
oh
If
boy.
anybody's ever gotten a spinal tap, they pull out a needle about, oh, my camera doesn't even
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
even go. It's like, it's huge. It's this huge needle. Bless my husband again, a very good sport. Thank you, Adam. And,
Say you can do that again. How big was the needle?
oh, they were perfect. The needle was this big. It was huge, biggest needle ever. And I'm like, they're gonna put that in my back, and they're gonna take fluid out of my back,
Yeah.
and so they put me through testing for meningitis. At the same time, they are pumping me with some very, very heavy duty drugs, and none of them are touching the pain. Not even close. And I'm talking serious drugs that I couldn't have gotten my hands on when I did drugs if I wanted to.
Yeah.
And nothing was touching the pain. And the spinal tap results come back totally fine. And the doctor said, we can't find anything wrong with you. It must be some sort of super virus. And we'll send you home with some Percocet to help with the pain from the spinal tap. And
Oh, boy.
hopefully you'll be okay. And what I see now, John, in hindsight, is I was having a spiritual awakening, that my
Okay.
body was telling me, you are going down the wrong path. And if you do not stop, something much worse is going to happen. And I completely see that in hindsight now, because they could not find anything wrong with me. There was nothing physically or medically explainable. Yet my experience was very real. And I see now, because at that time I would have told you it was a psychic attack, that I
Okay.
was doing healing work that was opening me up to other dimensions, that I was under psychic attack. That's what I believed.
And
And
who would have been in that concept? Who would have been psychically attacking you?
yeah, so in my beliefs at that time, and
Mm.
studying shamanism and believing in other dimensions beyond the dimension we're in here on Earth, that it were entities, that 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 entities or dark energy was attacking me.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what I believed wholeheartedly, and everyone in my circle, of course, affirmed that and validated that in me as well, because that was our belief system.
Yeah.
Now, and the understanding that I have now, I'm not saying those things actually don't exist, um, but I can see now that it was actually an awakening of, if you don't start to figure yourself out, you're gonna get really sick. And I think that I had that awakening in preparation to be able to let in what I was going to learn later that month, which was so much more pragmatic and practical and grounded in reality than anything I was doing at the time. And that's where I met my mentors, and they were the first people to help me see that it was unnatural to look for my answers outside of me, and that it was not anything from my past, not anything from my upbringing or um, my life, that I was such a mess, um, that it was me. They were the ones to help me see I was the problem in my life, and therefore empowered to be the solution, simply through making different choices and decisions.
Wow.
And that led me on a completely different path. And that's where everything came crumbling down very abruptly, because once I knew that it was unnatural to find my answers outside of me, and that my answers were actually in me, I could no longer, with integrity or authenticity, have people come see me to get answers.
Right.
So I stopped everything I was doing for that reason, and also seeing, oh my gosh, I'm not being true to myself. None of this is who I am. This is just who I thought I needed to become to get my life together. And I don't enjoy doing any of this. It was all a show. It was all a facade. And that just crumbled very quickly.
Wow. And that's fascinating. And so, how did your husband handle this?
You know, again, he's a good sport. He's such a good sport. Um, he's a good man, and what I teach now, and what I've learned in my marriage, is that good men want one thing for their wives. They want them to be happy.
Mhm.
That's what my husband has always wanted for me, will always want for me, is just wants me to be happy. So again, he was a very good sport, and he continued to explore what was true for him, and very much allowed me the space to explore what was true for me. And it was a bit of a shock. I did not, when I knew we that I didn't want to be in business and have a healing practice, in the way that I was, and I didn't want to be in business with my husband. I did not deliver that news tactfully. I just kind of, wow, this is where I'm at, and I don't want to be in business anymore. And I think my husband had a panic attack. and had to leave and go for a walk. And then we navigated it from there. It was a rough year. It was a
fair
rough,
enough. Yeah.
it was a rough year. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, hey, you got through it.
We got through it, and it was necessary for me to be healthy and happy now. And it was necessary for my marriage to be healthy and authentic as well.
Incredible. Yeah. And so, pardon me. And so now you speak about, I've mentioned, you've mentioned God and sort of a divine intervention. And did this bring you back to some version of Christian beliefs, or do you have a different interpretation of God, I guess?
Sure. For me, it is more in a Christian faith of how I view God. Once for a long time in my rebellion, I resented my Catholic upbringing and Christian upbringing. I resented growing up in the Bible Belt, and thought, kind of dismissed the idea of God altogether. And then when I was on my spiritual path, I more wanted to believe in the universe, and that new age spiritual idea of God or the universe. And then as I started to build a relationship with myself, and I started to actually for the first time get to know me, it was amazing that that's where a relationship with God unfolded. And
Yeah.
that's where I felt the connection with God. And I never would have thought that going in and connecting with myself would have led me to God. But it's been a really natural path that's unfolded that has become really, really important to me. And I'm very grateful for, very, very grateful for. And I never ever would have thought that that would have been the full circle that I came back to
No
all
kidding.
along.
Yeah. It's just quite
Quite the journey.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny. I was interviewed earlier for another podcast today, and I said, man, if you'd have told me at 20 that this is what my next 20 years were going to look like,
Right?
I probably would have checked out. Like,
Yeah.
I would have been like, nope, not doing it.
Would have been terrified to know. Yeah, it happened exactly how it needed to happen. And now I can see God had a plan and everything. And this was the path that I needed to take to get to myself and to start to grow and learn and become me and really know me.
Yeah. I think that's why we're given time.
Yeah.
It's
a process.
So how would you define happiness now from this perspective? Because
Yeah.
we've talked about it as the euphoric high that so many people think, and we've discovered that it's not that. And
It's not that.
to sort of frame it, because I differentiate between happiness and pleasure. And the Bible, one of the principles that Jesus teaches is self-denial. And I wrestled with that one for a very, very long time. I thought, well, this is really interesting because it's something that makes me feel good. Why shouldn't I do it? But as I understand sort of physiology, psychology, I realized that the pursuit of pleasure leads to addiction, which can eventually lead to death. And so opting not to pursue endless pleasure is avoiding the path of addiction and potentially death.
Wow, I haven't heard that before. And yes, I very much differentiate between pleasure and happiness. That happiness is not the pursuit of pleasure, and happiness is not the pursuit of a feeling or an emotion. That happiness is not, that's where I believe we get really off track, is we think happiness is about feeling happy or the emotion of happy. And that is not what happiness is. Happiness is a state of being, and it is a deep acceptance of yourself and your life, a life without lack or want, where you only want to be you and you only want the life you have. And how we get to that place. And it doesn't mean that then we can't have goals or vision or things that we want to achieve and experience in our lives. We just no longer pursue those things from a place of thinking, once I get here, I'll be happy.
Right.
It actually switches to a place, and how you get to a place of deep acceptance and only wanting to be you, only wanting the life you have, which is my experience of being happy. Because life is not without challenges. I saw a post on your Instagram, John, about struggle, and life is going to have struggle. That's the reality of life. So it's not realistic to think we're going to get to a place where we always feel blissed out and we always feel great and life is wonderful, because that's not the reality. So happiness has to be a much deeper experience of feeling good about who we are in spite of the challenges and struggles that we go through, and just wanting to be who we are, just wanting the lives we have. And how we get there is from a place of self-actualization, of making choices and decisions in life that allow you to grow and learn into the best version of yourself. And it's
Mhm.
through those choices and decisions that you get to know who you are, you get to know your potential, and you feel good about yourself because you know you're doing the best you can. And from that place, that's where we can live from a place without lack or want, and
Mhm.
really accept ourselves and our journey and run into our lives and embrace our lives instead of trying to run away and create something else that we think we're missing.
Yeah. Well, Karyn, I mean, wow, we've
We've covered
it's
a lot of
we've
ground.
covered a lot of ground. It's an incredible story. Have you written a book?
I've not written a book yet.
Okay, that should be on your list, because I mean, there's so much more of your story that could be explored. But
Thank
we're,
you.
we're out of time at this point. It's been
Thank you.
absolutely fascinating having this conversation. And I really, really appreciate your openness, your vulnerability, your willingness to be just very real and genuine. That's what really touches people about these stories, is when you're not talking to someone who's presenting some persona or some facade. It's like, this is who I am in all of my imperfect glory,
Yeah.
and you know,
That
but
would have been
it's
who you got 8 years ago. You would have gotten the
yeah.
facade and the trying to be somebody very much.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you were to give sort of one nugget of wisdom that people could take away from this conversation, if they've listened to this and they go, "Wow,
Mhm.
man, that's a heck of a story," but like, what would you like people to take away from your
Mhm.
story and your experience?
To embrace the challenges that your life has brought you, to embrace the limitations that you've struggled with in yourself through your life, no matter what they are, if they're similar to my path with drugs and rebellion and getting into a lot of trouble and self-destruction, um, or being a perfectionist and trying to do everything perfect in life and constantly trying to live up to something you think you're supposed to be, or anywhere in between. um, that's where we grow and learn. And when we embrace our limitations and we embrace our struggles and our shortcomings, that's where we can begin to outgrow those shortcomings and become the best version of ourselves. That life is not meant to be a straight line where everything fits perfectly into a box. It is
Hmm.
very much an up and down journey, and it's supposed to be that.
Hmm.
So when we run into our lives to embrace the struggles life brings us, but to also embrace our own shortcomings, that's really where we find who we are. It's where we learn to adapt and have resilience and really embrace the ups and downs of life. That's what I believe we're here to do, to feel good about ourselves and to get to know who we are. We don't get to know who we are when everything is perfect and in a straight line. It doesn't
Yeah.
exist. That's a fantasy. And then we're
Yeah.
living in an illusion. We get to know who we are and we feel good about ourselves when we embrace the adversity and we embrace the challenges of life.
I love that. We get to know who we are when we embrace the adversity of life. Yeah,
Yeah.
life reveals character. So I think that's just incredible wisdom to adopt. Well, Karyn, thank you so much for being on today. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you,
Thank
and I'm
you.
sure we're going to have more conversations.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It's been wonderful to be here, and I really appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Between the Before and After. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, subscribe, or leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. I love exploring the stories that take place between the before and after, the powerful experiences that shape who we become. And I love human potential. I love the possibilities that lie within us. So whatever you may be up against, I hope these stories inspire you, because if you're still here, your story's not done yet, so keep moving forward.
Anyone can come from any place of brokenness and destitution and build an amazing life.